First, I would like to welcome Joe to Melbourne. It's a great to meet Joe, and he will achieve a lot by meeting the Eritrean community in Melbourne. As we know, he wrote a book about Eritrean history, covering the critical period 1941-61, and there are many Eritreans here knowledgeable about that period. So meeting those members of the community will be good. And so the purpose of his visit to Australia is first to meet those senior Eritreans, and also to meet the members of the Eritrean community, and to create a working relationship with the Eritrean community in Melbourne and in Australia as well. So we welcome him, and we'll have a busy time with Joe in the coming few days.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thank you for viewing. I should say, أسيف. أنا عندما طالب في الجامعة أوهايو. أنا أتكلم اللغة العربية كويس، ولكن الآن لا أعرف عربية. So I'll speak in English now. But I'm very honored to be here. This is really just a wonderful opportunity, and I'm so grateful to be able to share with people not only my work, but to just speak with others about their experiences, because my perspective is this is the story of Eritreans, and I'm just honored to be able to learn from the community and to be a part of hearing that story. And I know I have many more things to learn, and I hope that by being here we can begin a great dialogue and maybe help bring out more of that history that I think is so fascinating.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
والله أقول لكم إيش، يعني الأستاذ جو شرفنا في ملبن، ونحن سعيدين جدا بلقائه. وعايزك بس to share some part in when your research was, and when did you started, why were you interested in Eritrea in particular?
Yeah.
So if you can share that light, would be
I
very
will.
interesting.
Sure, it's a very good question. I was a student as an undergraduate, and I was very interested in African history. And when I went for my master's degree at Ohio University, I wanted to study the Horn of Africa. And when I was there, I met many students who were from Eritrea, and I met some faculty members who were also Eritrean. And gradually I became more interested in this very small country in the Horn of Africa. And I was fascinated by the story, the armed struggle, the experience of Eritreans during and after the struggle. And I was fascinated by the story of a country that had so much diversity, that had essentially two great religions, and built a sense of nationhood out of this diversity. I thought it was a very unique story. And I felt as a person that there is a beauty in that story. And when I began my research, I wanted to examine some aspect of that story. And I began looking not so much at the armed struggle, but what was happening before it. Because as I was investigating, I was kind of surprised that there was not a lot of information, written information, about the years before the armed struggle. And that lack of information encouraged me to begin to try and find it.
While we were talking yesterday, and you told me about some information when you were in England, where in the British colonial time, there were untouched documentaries, and you were surprised to. Can you shed some light on that, please?
Yeah, well, I think as many Eritreans know, the British did a lot of damage in Eritrea, but one of the things they did well was compile information. And when I was in the archives at the Foreign Office in London, as well as Rhodes House, which is in Oxford University, there were documents from British officials who were stationed in Eritrea. People like Kennedy Travaskis, officials who were living in Eritrea during the 1940s and early 50s. And they had a lot of information about the political developments happening. They had a lot of secret reports, what they call intelligence reports, documenting the activities of activists, both nationalists and unionists. And some of the documents have been mentioned in previous books, but many of the real important documents and aspects have not really been examined. So what I tried to do was look at those documents and begin to build a story about what happened. And I used those British sources with sources from Arabic and Tigrinya newspapers and some oral histories to try and build a better idea of what happened.
Yes, you relied on Eritrean sources and non-Eritrean sources.
Yes.
Did you find the Eritrean sources balanced, tell the truth, and also sometimes as a student, a PhD student, it might contradict the two sources. So how did you resolve that issue?
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. You know, I believe when you look at any culture's history, you have to look at it from their voices. I would never have written this book, this project, if I didn't have basic reading ability, at least in Tigrinya and Arabic. And though knowledge of those languages opened up the world of Eritrea in the 1940s and 50s. And as I was reading these documents, these newspapers, articles, even in some cases unpublished books that activists wrote and just kept in their private collections, I began to get a sense of the basic story. Yes, there were disagreements about certain things, but when you compare the Eritrean sources to the British sources and even the American sources, you can begin to fill in gaps, and you still, over time, begin to have a clear picture of what was happening. Even if the perspective is different, you begin to understand why is it that the British government was against Eritrean nationalism. Why were the Ethiopians so interested in dividing Eritreans? So the sources do fill in the story, even though their perspectives can be different. So for example, sometimes when I was doing my research, I came across Arabic newspapers or Arabic articles, and they would have a different perspective than maybe the Tigrinya ones, which makes sense. There are different concerns. But if you read them both and you begin to try and put those writings in the bigger context, you can see what was happening, and you can begin to see a story. And I believe it's important to have the diversity of opinion, because even from unionist sources, you can get information. You might not agree with it, but you can at least understand what the situation was like, and you develop a better awareness about the big picture.
Yeah. So yeah, you said the pre-armed struggle period was important because it decided whether Eritrea to be an independent entity or not. And in your profile, you mentioned you want to continue research, and you said 1960s and 70s. But we have also periods where very interesting. All the books written about, for example, the 1961, 80, and so on, they are from the perspective of people who made the history or were part of the struggle, and always you find them biased. So people will ask why only you saying 60s and 70s. What's the future plan?
Yeah. Well, when you write a book or do any kind of research, you have to have some limit on what you're going to focus on. And in this first book, I stopped in 1961 because when the armed struggle begins, the nature of nationalism changes. It goes from being about debates and discussions to real action, to real physical military action. And when you look at the period from 1961 up until now, there are also different stages. And those stages have different qualities and different aspects, and you can focus on different things in those periods. So my perspective is, when you're writing a history, you need to have an awareness of the chronology and begin to organize your research within certain time periods, because it helps you clarify your argument and also to understand how the changes occurred. So what I would like to do in the future is, yes, look at what was happening in the 1960s and especially the early 70s, because that's an important period where major changes are going to happen, where the armed struggle is going to be transformed. And I think there have been some books and some studies on that, but yes, I think there's so much information out there, there's so much personal history that people have that needs to be shared, that we're always finding new information, and that information should be unlocked and shared among people.
I'm really surprised by your interest in Eritrea, even though it's a very small country and with a lot of diversity. And you focused on your book with that diversity usually in the whole of Africa.
Yeah.
The division was growing up and much bigger. But in Eritrea, the contrary, the diversity was strength.
Yes.
And you focused on that.
Yeah.
And that's what we need right now. What happened in the 40s and 60s, and now it's quite different. And we need to bring and share these ideas so we can, these differences to be strength instead of being a weakness.
Yeah.
So can you shed some light on that, please?
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think Eritrea's story in the 1940s and 50s was unique in some important ways because of this ability to bring people together in a very new way that hadn't really happened before. I think if you compare the current situation in Eritrea, in the diaspora, there's a lot of similarities though, in the sense that there are major challenges. And just like in the 1940s and 50s, people are debating and arguing about what it means to be Eritrean. What does it mean to support the government? What does it mean to challenge the government? These are the same kinds of debates that were happening in the 40s and 50s. The circumstances, yes, were very different, but you still have a situation where people are developing important questions about what it is to be Eritrean. And I think even though the situation is different, the idea of coming together and having dialogue, of really finding a way to discuss these issues in a constructive way, is just as important now as it was 60, 70 years ago. And I believe if we look at the period of time in the 1940s and 50s, maybe some lessons can be learned. Maybe we can look and see some of the successes then, and perhaps use them to inform our current situation.
Definitely.
Yeah, if I could add to that, yeah, as you said, Eritreans, they led their peaceful struggle and then the armed struggle along nationalist line. Now it's contrary. So there is a decline of Eritrean nationalism, and there is a rise of regionalism and ethnism.
Yes.
And I think it started maybe in mid-70s, and now it's just so there are reasons, of course, complex reasons for this. And yeah, we just want to learn from our history, because this division is not leading us in fact, it's leading us to a deadlock.
Yeah.
So hopefully the people will learn from your lecture. You brought up the history where Eritreans were just, I mean, you could say they were more nationalist, whereas today they are just divided along all these lines. And in fact, the purpose of, after we read the book review, we immediately realized that there is a history, a lesson to be learned here, which we could apply in today's situation.
Yeah, thank you. I think whenever you write history, you have to be aware of the application of that history to the world you live in.
Yeah.
And I believe that with the situation in Eritrea, that there needs to be a positive use of history, a positive use of the history to bring people together more, because the legacy of the nationalist movement is something that all Eritreans should be proud of. And I say that not only with regard to Eritrean society or African society, but globally. You know, we live in very challenging times now, and people are often divided by these identities, by religion, by ethnicity, by political differences. And I feel like if there is a way to at least examine what has happened and draw positive lessons, that maybe some of those lessons can be used to help people's current situation. Because I think regardless of your ethnicity, your religion, what region you're from, if you're from Akaduguzai or Hamasien, Sahel, wherever you know, we all care about our families. We all want to have a future.
A peaceful country.
We all want to have a peaceful country, right? And I think that humanity is something that we all can be proud of and relate to, right? And that's where it's not just a story about Eritrea. I think it's a story about people. I think it's a story about what people are willing to do to try and build a better society. So I hope that by talking about the past, you know, we all can build a better future for all Eritreans, both in Eritrea and in the diaspora.
Yeah, I think as they say, the past informs the present and the future.
Yeah.
This discussion is quite interesting, and it can go on and on. But I think you have a lot people interested in your work, so probably we might stop here for today, and we'll give chance to others. There are many who are really grateful for your work, and they really want to meet you and discuss with you many issues.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful to them for being interested.
Yes. Yeah.